Well, howdy, folks. Phil here from the Blue Envelope channel. So I thought I'd make a video today about the show Severance and how the parallels with Jehovah's Witnesses. I have to admit, I came to Severance kind of late in the game. I have that thing where if everybody's saying something's really good, that makes me contrary and I won't watch it. So I never watched the first season of Severance when it came out. But for some reason, I decided to check out it now that the season two's out, and it's pretty good. I would probably put it right up with other stuff like The Matrix or The Truman Show as far as stuff that's allegories are relatable about being in a high control group or leaving one, that kind of thing. Very good. So I kind of wrote down some notes about stuff I was noticing that reminded me of Jehovah's Witnesses. So I thought I'd just kind of run through those here and see what if you notice those too or whatever. Spoiler alert, I'm just going to discuss everything. So if you haven't got through the end of season 2 yet, maybe pause and come back once you've watched both seasons. So the first thing I had was just the whole basic concept of the show, this idea of a split life, an innie life and an outie life. Jehovah's Witnesses usually call it living a double life. So you're one person in one environment, and then you're almost this completely different person in this different environment. And there's some witnesses that are really good at having an innie and outie life that they keep apart. They have separate friends, separate clothes they wear, and their true self is the outie, the one that's out of the religion, the non-witness personality. But then they have to put on this fake innie personality for their family or whatever is keeping them in the religion. It's kind of weird that being a witness actually sort of trains you to be dishonest or sneaky. You know, especially as a witness kid, if you're growing up in the religion, you know there's things that are just forbidden by your parents or the elders, you know, media and songs and movies and stuff like that. And you know that your value in the eyes of your parents is to some extent, either a little bit or a lot, tied to how good you do at being a witness. So you just kind of learn to hide those parts of yourself that don't fit the perfect witness kid picture. You learn to sneak around and tell half truths. And honestly, I think you see that to some extent just in the religion as a whole. I mean, you can look at almost any court case where the Watchtower Society is involved, whether it's about child abuse or disfellowshipping or whatever, and you'll hear the society lawyers either kind of pussyfoot around the truth or even just straight up lie about witness practices, just kind of whatever it takes to win the case and preserve the status quo that they want. I think sometimes where it gets really frustrating for PMO or POMO witnesses is that now and then you'll have a witness, a PME witness, and they're able to openly merge the innie and outer life. I'm thinking like a recent example would be Serena Williams. She very much has this not Jehovah's Witness life that she leads, and then simultaneously she can also lead the approved PME witness lifestyle, which can be, if you ever look on, comments about her videos or whatever, can be really irritating or frustrating for folks who don't have, aren't rich and famous to be able to live that way. And we see that in the show Severance, where there's the rich senator's wife who gets severed. And the reason is so her innie can be the one that has to go through the pain of childbirth. Or there's Mrs. Casey's innie, where she's the one that has to go to the dentist and get a root canal, or I think that's what's going on there. Another point I was thinking about is it was interesting how deferential the innies are to the bosses, to the authority, at least till Heliar shows up anyway. They don't make waves. They don't question anything about how things are working or what's being done. They are really true believers in the Lumen way. And that's kind of like Pimi witnesses. But then Heliar shows up and they start to question things a little bit, start to have questions and wonder, well, why are we doing something this way or that way? And there starts to be some distrust about the bosses, like that there's some ulterior scheme that's going on that the innies aren't aware of. And that feels more like kind of a Pimo witness at that point. And it's kind of interesting on the show. You get a sense of the danger of doing that it's very risky to start to question things. One thing you notice is Lumen never uses physical violence against the innies to keep them in line. And I kind of wondered, like, what's stopping them from just beating the employees in the break room sessions. But I guess, if the Audi woke up and they found bruises all over their body or a broken arm, they'd probably quit the job. So Lumen's kind of stuck with doing more of like a psychological torture in the break room. And there's always like a little hint of like violence just off screen, like just in the background, like that the Lumen bosses could turn violent against the innies, but they don't. And they just use these psychological techniques. And I think that's similar to Jehovah's Witnesses. Witnesses don't beat, witnesses who are in a judicial committee. They don't stone apostates like the Israelites used to do. They too use these psychological techniques to kind of break someone's will and keep them in line. One small thing I noticed was how the innies would kind of pick up little breadcrumbs, little clues in the paintings or in the manuals about what's going on, the world that they're in here. And they would start to kind of develop these big theories about what the work they were actually doing was for. Like some of the early theories were that they were cleaning the ocean or deleting swear words from movies. They're kind of theorizing who Kier was, and he almost becomes like this mythical godlike figure down there. And that reminded me too of Pimi witnesses will kind of develop their own theology almost, or lines of reasoning about why things are the way they are and how it actually all makes sense, even though on the surface some things don't seem to make sense. There was a Reddit post recently, and it was a ex-witness talking about how when they were a teenager, they were kind of developed these lines of reasoning of why the religion must be the true religion. Another aspect you'll see that is a lot of witnesses will believe that actually not all non-witnesses are going to die at Armageddon. Like lots of people are going to survive, even though the religion actually, when you get right down to it, explicitly teaches that, 99.9% of humans are going to die at Armageddon. Another thing I was thinking of was how how Innie Dylan was super into the Lumen way. Like he was the most enthusiastic one in the early episodes, and how he showed off like all his little cheesy prizes, the finger traps and the caricature pictures that he won. And that was just like, he was super happy with that. That was the most he ever wanted down there. Until the overtime contingency, where he got a glimpse of his son, his Audi son, and then, whoa, it was like a whole different ballgame. And knowing more about his Audi family was instantly the thing he wanted most, even though that never even crossed his mind before. I was thinking about, as a witness too, you might not even be aware of what you truly want because you suppress those things so much down deep. You just know there's like danger to go down that road until maybe the policy changes. I was thinking about like how beards are now allowed, or women can wear pants to the meetings, and instantly like huge numbers of witnesses are suddenly growing beards and wearing pants to the meeting. They're so happy that actually a lot of them wanted to do that all along. They just didn't allow themselves to admit it. The whole reintegration theme was really interesting in the show. It's not uncommon that somebody will leave Jehovah's Witnesses and they're basically at that point like, okay, who the heck am I? Like, what do I believe now that the religion's not telling me what to believe? What are my values? What's most important to me? What do I like to do? What are my hobbies? You can kind of feel like you have no personality once the religion's removed from the picture, because your personality and your interests and the stuff you were allowed to do was all dictated to you by the religion. The whole thing was stripping away your old personality, your authentic self, and putting on the new personality, the JW personality. And so when folks do leave, it can be a years long or even the rest of their life process of figuring out what bits of me from my time as being a witness are actually me, and I want to keep those parts, and then what was the cult me, and I'll discard those parts. And it's almost flipped, because in the show, the Audi is the one with the broader experience and understanding of what's going on, and the innie is the more naive one. But for witnesses, it's almost flipped. Like our Pomo ex-witness Audi self is the one that starts out being kind of formless and like a little baby almost. We don't know how to drink or what stuff we want to explore. That self needs time to develop and kind of integrate with the parts we want to keep from our innie self. Another thing I was thinking about was how going to Bethel is a lot like the severance procedure. If you're going to do that, you're just truly like ceding all control. You're just immersing yourself into witness culture, a witness lifestyle, and saying, okay, you guys take the wheel. I'll just do whatever you tell me to, whether it's the Watchtower Society or Lumen in the show. And it could be a couple different reasons. It could be because you're such a true believer that you're like, yeah, this is the best way of life. Or it could be something like you're a gay man and you hate that about yourself, and you feel like being at the hub of Jehovah's Witnesses will be so spiritually immersive that it will cure you once and for all. In the Second School podcast, Ben Ford talked about how when he was at London Bethel, they were explicitly instructed in like performance interviews that Bethelites should never say anything negative about Bethel to non-Bethelites, even though negative stuff would happen now and then. But that was the rule. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. You always portray Bethel service to outsiders as 100% positive, 100% of the time. Also is just like how, if you spent any time at Bethel, there's kind of a vibe there. I'm not sure if it's the lighting they use or the cleaning products or just how like everybody's walking around dressed a specific style and kind of always, you're never going to see somebody like cranky in the hallways, but it just feels a little off. Like it's not quite the real world. And that reminded me a lot of the Severed floor in Severance. They do a really good job where everything's just a little weird. It's just a little off from normal, and that makes it kind of creepy. One thing I was noticing was how scary leaving is for the innies. Early on, Helly is just like, I want to quit. I want to resign. And they kind of point out to her that a resignation request is basically kind of requesting your own death because you only exist as an innie. So it's basically suicide. So they're kind of trapped in this world that they don't control. And it's not a particularly great world in a lot of ways, but at least they do exist. One of them says something like, they only give us half a life, but then think we won't fight for that half. And it's kind of similar with witnesses. A lot of witnesses aren't like super duper happy with everything and all the sacrifices they make and how they kind of stand out from everybody else in the world. But I mean, it's not all drudgery at the same time. There's also good stuff that happens. as a witness. There's fun times that you can have here and there. And so you can kind of feel like, well, it's not like super awesome, but why rock the boat? At least we get some happiness. And then because leaving is just this like complete unknown thing, and you're just kind of imagining, and well, you're told, all the time at the meetings that things are way worse outside the religion. But so there's that, but there's also a curiosity about the outside. I can remember probably in my late teens, I was working at a ski shop, and there was this other lady that worked there, and she invited me one winter day to go skiing because we get like discount ski passes. And like I mean, she was much older. She was like my grandma's age, but there was still that thing like, I know this really isn't kosher with witnesses to go spend 6 hours alone with this woman I'm not married to. So I could feel like that danger aspect to it, but it was also kind of intriguing. Like I just kind of wanted to, well, what would happen if I do this? Am I going to die? And so I went, and you can kind of see that with the overtime contingency thing. When that happens, the innies are so desperate. They're so interested to know what lies outside the lumen walls. But they're also kind of like terrified. And we see later in season 2 that the innie, Mark S., turns down the reintegration because he's scared that he may no longer exist once he's free of lumen. So it's kind of complicated. There's like multiple things going on. Related to that is this concept of how you can escape from being an innie. So Heliar, like we said, is told that requesting resignation is essentially meaning to kill herself because she only exists as an innie. But despite knowing that, she still ultimately decides to try and hang herself in the elevator. So it's both an escape from this life that she's trapped in, and it's also a way to get back at or hurt her outie self who won't let her resign. And as a witness, I mean, it's kind of the same thing. Like suicide is a valid way of escaping life as a witness if you feel trapped there. It's frowned on, definitely. It's discouraged, but it is allowed. And I mean, even as a kid, in many ways, it feels preferable because if you grow up, every year that goes by, that's just really more chances that you're going to mess up, that you're going to sin in a way that will block you from getting into paradise. But if you just end your life on kind of a high note before you've done anything bad, it's like an instant shortcut to paradise. So in some ways, it's really understandable why so many witnesses choose to end their life by suicide. Theologically, there's really no downside to it. It's only upsides. Now, that said, of course, it only makes sense that way if Watchtower theology is correct and, paradise is coming. As soon as you die, you're resurrected into paradise earth. Otherwise, obviously, it's a terrible loss of a human life that could have accomplished so much. Another little thing I noticed was how there's like so much fear on the severed floor about looking at any contraband material. So Mark S. has that map early on that PD left for him, and then he like shreds it in the shredder, which was horrible to watch. And then a little later, they find Ricken's book inside that Lumen office room. And so Irving's first reaction is to, well, we got to turn this in to Mr. Milchek. And it's very similar with witnesses. Anything that seems quote unquote apostate, super dangerous, should be avoided immediately. Like don't even touch it. The illustration that's often used is how like one drop of poison can contaminate an entire glass of water. I can remember one time in service that thing happened where the house leader is like, well, I'll take your literature if you take one of my tracts. And so I was like, well, okay. And I can remember even like walking down the driveway before I'd even got off their property, I was crumpling up their tract in my hand so I wouldn't be contaminated or poisoned at all. And I'm 100% sure they were doing the exact same thing with my tract that I'd given them. So Yeah. Another thing I wrote down was how the work of being a witness, whether it's, preaching or going to Bethel or whatever, that is the most important thing you can be doing with your life. In the show Severance, the work they do is really confusing. It's not super clear. Like the innies don't really understand what it is they're doing, but they know that it's mysterious and important. And witnesses are basically taught the same thing. The preaching work doesn't, realistically seem super effective. A lot of witnesses will go their entire life and never convert a single person. It's basically a huge waste of time. But you're constantly told that this is the most important work you can do in this time of the end. So they don't even attempt doing, homeless shelters or soup kitchens or anything that would be useful to society right now. Everything is centered and focused on this great and mysterious work that Watchtower says to do, which again is usually focused either on the preaching work or on building construction. And it's interesting when you think about it, you would think that the people that get the most recognition or rewards in the religion would be the people that like convert the most people. Like that would be the biggest accomplishment. And it's actually not. It's just the people who work the hardest, like who put the most hours into it. So, pioneers get more honor than publishers, and special pioneers get more honor than pioneers, and missionaries are above them. But it doesn't really matter if you actually bring anybody into the truth. It's just about putting the time in and working hard. Also, you don't actually get any tangible rewards for doing that stuff. It's basically just a handshake, a pat on the back, and then just kind of the recognition from other witnesses, the status that you get. And very much that way in Lumen too, where the rewards for working the hardest are just like the saddest and most hilarious things ever, like the paper finger traps or the 5-minute music dance experience. The highest reward is getting to eat waffles. Kind of a related point is how the religion has so many activities and things just to use up all your time during the week. So they definitely gradually reduced it over the decades, but I mean, there's still 2 meetings every week. You got to go out in field service. You've got assemblies or conventions every 4 months you have to attend. And then if you have a part on the assembly, that's more of your weekends gone because you have to go up for rehearsals and whatnot. Preparing for the meetings. If you have a talk assignment, you have to write the talk and rehearse the talk. There's congregation activities and get-togethers. Like I think most congregations have they'll have an annual meeting for the pioneers, and then they'll have a dinner afterwards, kind of honoring the pioneers. And oftentimes nobody's like super into these activities, but you just kind of feel like you have to do it, either to show the pioneers your appreciation for what they're doing, or if you're a pioneer, then you feel like you kind of have to attend because others put the work into preparing the shindig, even though both people would probably just as soon be at home relaxing and watching TV on the couch. So everybody just kind of stays on this constant treadmill of activity for no reason. One thing I had written down is how interesting Mr. Milchick is in the show. I'm not sure if he's a born in Lumen person like Miss Cobell and Miss Huang seem to be, or if he's a convert to Lumen. I kind of think he's a convert that came into Lumen later in life mostly because of his extreme zeal for Lumen. It often seems like converts to Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or whatever, they kind of have this extra gear where they take their zeal to the next level. I think maybe it's because they haven't been in it their whole life. They feel kind of like they need to super duper prove their loyalty to the religion. I remember when my mom converted, she was about 30, 33, and she was a huge book reader. One thing she really enjoyed was reading Agatha Christie murder mysteries. And if you ever read one of those murder mysteries or watched a Agatha Christie movie, it's like 5% murder and then 95% solving the mystery. But when she became a witness, she felt moved to destroy all her Agatha Christie books because murder is wrong. And it was kind of a signal of how serious she was about becoming a witness that she would do that. Now, a decade later, she had mellowed right out. And I mean, when we borrow movies from the library to watch, a big percentage of them were British murder mysteries because they're really like there's no sex or swearing or anything, and they're pretty safe for a witness to watch. But as a fresh convert, she was really happy and motivated to destroy something that brought her a lot of pleasure to demonstrate her loyalty to Lumen or to Watchtower in this case. And Mr. Milchick kind of has that similar, like, all in 110% vibe to him. He kind of seems like maybe a little bit like the Anthony Morris of Lumen, where he's all in, but he's almost like too much in, where it could kind of tip over the edge into leaving, like his faith would crack and fall apart. We see how Anthony Morris is gone now off the governing body, and one of the leading theories is that because he was unwilling to kind of compromise on stuff that changed soon after he left the governing body, like softening disfellowshipping and not having to turn in time anymore, and brothers wearing beards and sisters wearing pants, that kind of stuff. When it comes to witnesses who leave the religion, obviously you can't say, like, witnesses can't say, oh, they left because it's not the truth. That is incompatible with their mindset. And so there's these usually a couple narratives that witnesses always have about people who leave. One is that they left because they want to sin and do bad stuff. And then the other is, well, they were never really in it in the first place. They never really had faith or really believed it. But I actually think, I'm pretty sure, based on, folks I've interacted with, that a lot of witnesses end up leaving because they were too zealous. They wanted to learn everything they could about the religion. They really delved into the publications, older publications, and in doing so much personal study, they kind of inevitably stumble on more unsavory stuff about the religion, or stuff that really doesn't make sense. And so when they delve too deeply, that ultimately leads them to the conclusion that the religion isn't true. And that's when they leave. So it's actually a lot of times the most zealous folks that end up leaving. Another thing about Mr. Milchick is he definitely has a ton of authority over the severed employees, and he's not severed, so he knows a whole lot more about what's going on and how things work. But at the same time, he himself is also almost always just a single misstep away from getting in trouble. And especially with the time around his performance review, he gets in trouble for silly stuff like using too many big words, or putting paper clips backwards on the packets of paper. It kind of reminded me of how the position elders have, or circuit overseers and their wives. They do have a lot of authority over their underlings, but at the same time, they're relatively powerless themselves. It's one thing, especially with circuit overseers' wives, how usually they all have long, like, lists of food allergies and preferences when they come to the congregation. And I feel like that's, I think it's partly like an autoimmune thing, just from all the stress that they're under. But partly I think it's just because that's one thing they can control in their lives, is the food they eat, because there's such a relative lack of control in other parts of their lives. So I'll be interested to see in season 3 if Mr. Milchick has like a Anthony Morris fall from grace and gets fired, maybe even like joins forces with the severed employees. We'll have to see. Another thing you notice around Mr. Milchick is kind of the casual racism of Lumen. And it's the most obvious part is when Mr. Milchick, who's a black man, is given a portrait of the founder as a reward for his good work. And the painting reimagines Keir Egan as a black man. And you can tell instantly, like, Mr. Milchick is kind of repulsed by that reimagination. And at one point he tries to kind of broach the subject with Natalie, who's also like another person of color down there. And she doesn't even want to go there. But it reminded me a lot of how Watchtower has done that, where they'll take the white people on the cover of a brochure or magazine, and then when for the issue sent to Africa, they'll change it to black people on the cover. And it really makes sense that this is a sales organization. It made the most sense when they were selling the literature. They were charging money for it. And so for predominantly white countries, they felt the broadest appeal would be having white people on the cover. And then for the predominantly black countries, they'll switch it to black, basically just whichever will generate the most sales. Another thing I had written down is how each department on the severed floor is kept from having knowledge about the other departments, and even how Lumen will deliberately spread disinformation about the other departments to create distrust, so they don't interact. And they notably did that where they released two different versions of the same painting, where in the one given to macro data refinement, they're being attacked by optics and design. And then in the painting that went to optics and design, they're being attacked by macro data refinement. So each department thinks the other is the evil one. And we see that in Jehovah's Witnesses too, where information is kind of kept in silos. So, witnesses in Pennsylvania haven't been aware of the court proceedings in Norway over the disfellowshipping issue until just like last week they released a little press release about it. And at the same time, the Norwegian Jehovah's Witnesses haven't been aware of the grand jury investigation in Pennsylvania, where multiple witnesses are getting convicted of sex crimes that were hushed up by the organization. If either group had the full picture, that would probably cause a good number of witnesses in each location to kind of put two and two together and ultimately leave the organization. But they don't have the full picture. And so they tell themselves that, well, it's just a few bad apples. It's not a systemic issue where the whole religion's bad. Miss Wong was another interesting character. I want to know more about her backstory. Pretty much every character, I want to know their backstory. She's so young. She seems to have been born into the Lumen cult or Lumen corporation. And she has it's like such a strange life with so few glimpses of happiness or joy. Her one joy is that little ring toss game she has. And it's allowed. It's not forbidden or anything by Lumen rules, but eventually she's forced to sacrifice it, to actually destroy it herself for the corporation so she can progress higher into that Wintertide program. And that kind of reminded me of a lot of witness kids who, early in their life, they have certain hobbies or interests they're into, but eventually they're encouraged to get rid of all those for Jehovah. Don't play sports, don't pursue extra academic activities. They had a convention video a few years back where there's a young man and he was really talented with the violin, playing the violin, and he's eventually encouraged to stop playing it. Don't pursue that any further. And it's been a while since I watched it, but I think one of the final shots is him as a very old man in the hospital. And he's talking kind of wistfully about how, well, someday after he dies and then comes back to life in the resurrection, that's when he'll finally get to play the violin again. Another thing I had written down was the snitching culture in Lumen, which reminded me a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses. It seems like Miss Wong reported Mr. Milchick to the higher ups and got him in trouble for his performance review. And then later that he kind of retaliates on her and he makes her smash her ring toss game. And it's kind of similar in season 1. Mr. Milchick evidently sabotages Ms. Cobell by giving the higher ups photos of Heliar's suicide attempt in the elevator. And yeah, very much similar to the witnesses. You kind of have to report someone else's wrongdoing or else you'll get in trouble yourself for not reporting it. Another thing I noticed was the reverence for Lumen's origins, how the innies can visit the perpetuity wing, and Keir Egan, the founder, is held almost like a prophet, and his utterances are like scripture for the innies. For witnesses, I don't think the past Watchtower presidents are held quite as reverentially as the founders, as the Egan's are in Severance. Maybe Mormonism is more like that, where each president is a prophet. But there definitely has been a drive in recent years for witnesses to where most of the major Bethel branches now have a museum wing where witnesses can visit and kind of revere the past actions of Watchtower. And then, of course, the current governing body members are held in very high esteem. Witnesses will wait in long lines at assemblies just for the chance to shake the hand of a governing body member. And they're almost viewed as kind of like surrogate family members, where you invite them into your living room once a month to watch the JW Broadcasting episode. And of course, notably, the emphasis on Watchtower's heritage is always a very carefully curated experience. There's not going to be anything bad or negative mentioned in these exhibits. And we kind of see that with Lumen, too, with the Perpetuity Wing, because it does seem to be just like we've seen glimpses of the bad stuff in Lumen's history. Ms. Cobell's childhood seems pretty terrible. And we see that even though she evidently maybe invented the severance procedure, but also her family life was quite traumatic and terrible. Another theme that was real noticeable is how kind of asexual and sterile it is in Lumen. There's that scene early on where Vince Cobell tells Mark S., you may have a handshake, or how does she say it? A handshake is available upon request. He says, yes, I would like a handshake. They don't want innies getting pregnant, obviously. That would be like a PR disaster. In fact, there's actually a news clip early on where a severed worker's innie did get pregnant, and that's kind of a scandalous thing. Do innies know about and like have memories of having sex as their outie? They know some stuff from the outside world, although it seems to be more fact-based rather than any memories or experiences they had. So you see these really chaste little expressions of physical affection, like Irving saying he's not ready to hold hands with Bert, or Dylan just hugging his outie's wife initially. And the Lumen corporation or religion itself seems to be very austere and asexual. I was going to say the Egans must have sex sometimes because the dynasty passes from generation to generation, but I don't know. Maybe they don't. They're pretty weird. Maybe they just conceived by IVF or some scientific method. But yeah, it definitely reminded me of the purity culture in Jehovah's Witnesses, where sex is very hush hush. There's tons of talks about sex and pornography and masturbation and immorality, but it's always a very condemnatory kind of negative spin on it. And as is true in any abstinence-based society, that doesn't mean witnesses never look at porn or have sex outside marriage. They do it just as much as anybody else does. But now they have the big disadvantage of not having education about practicing safe sex and thus avoiding unwanted pregnancies or STIs. And then the other factor is this links sex to tremendous guilt and shame on the part of the witnesses. So that can make it hard or even impossible for men and women who get married to then kind of flip a switch and go from always viewing sex as evil and to be avoided at all costs to suddenly being these super sexual creatures who just want to get it on all the time. So that can definitely lead to a lot of sexual dysfunction in marriages. One other thing I had written down is there's that scene early on where Mark S. is talking about how Petey was just gone, and he wonders if he's dead, if his outie's dead. And Mr. Milchick immediately cuts him off to say, let's remind ourselves that death is something that happens outside of here, not here. And that the potential appropriate response to that is gratitude, as opposed to fear or grief or whatever. And it's kind of similar in witnesses. When it boils down to it, people essentially feel that they're gaining immortality by being witnesses. And I don't think any witness would say like that's the main reason they're a witness, but realistically, that plays a huge role, whether it's for ourselves personally, that we'll never experience death, or else we'll be resurrected in the new order, Or on the other hand, that our family is basically immortal, that they'll exist again in the future. In effect, they already exist in the future. And by being a witness, we're kind of paying our dues so we can be there with them, so we can see them again. So that's one aspect of it. And then kind of the flip side of that coin is when a loved one does die, it would be inappropriate to show excessive grief, because that would essentially be demonstrating a lack of faith, that maybe you doubt the promises of Kir or Jehovah. And it's framed that every time a loved one suddenly disappears from our life because of death, well, it's actually a time of rejoicing that they ran the race with endurance and they're now in paradise for perpetuity, and how grateful we should be that God has given us that gift. So it kind of creates a lot of cognitive dissonance at the time of a loved one's death for a believing witness. Well, those were kind of the main points I had written down about the parallels of witnesses and severance. I'd be curious to see if any of those resonate with you, or what parallels you noticed watching it. So definitely recommend checking out the show. Also, just want to give a shout out to an ex-Mormon channel that just did a video on the parallels between Severance and Mormonism, because I wanted to do a video on it, but it was a little overwhelming, like where to start. And then lo and behold, she put out a video, and it's really good. So check it out. It's the Girls Camp podcast channel with the host Haley Rawl. So it's helpful because she pulled a lot of comments from the ex-Mormon subreddit, things people were noticing. And also she I think her husband's a cinematographer, so she kind of goes more into like the look of the show a little bit. So yeah, check that out, and subscribe here if you haven't subscribed already, and we'll catch you all in the next video. Take care now.